Welcome to Drone Pilot MBA and Drone Business Insider.
You know that feeling, right?
Yeah.
You're about to take off, and there's that little bit of nervous energy, that pre-flight jitter. But what if this time it's not about the actual flight, but about what those new tariffs might mean for your drone business?
Yeah, totally. I mean, when we're talking about things like tariffs and price hikes and everything seems up in the air, it's normal to feel a little turbulence.
Yeah, I think a lot of our listeners are feeling that, worried that drone prices are going to skyrocket and the whole industry is going to, just stall out.
Right, and that's why we wanted to do this deep dive. We're going to lay out a solid flight plan to help you navigate this and hopefully, find some clear skies and even some tailwinds along the way.
Yeah, exactly. We've been gathering intel from a bunch of sources, and Tony Marino's recent article, he really hit the nail on the head. He's got some great advice on how drone pilots can take control, adapt, and respond to these new challenges.
Yeah, for sure.
So today, our mission is to cut through the noise and give you guys the essential insights and actionable strategies. We're your co-pilots, and we're here to make things clear, not more complicated.
Right. Clear skies ahead, hopefully.
Okay, so let's get the zero in the air first things first. What exactly are these tariffs everyone's talking about?
Well, in the simplest terms, and Russ over at 51 Drones put it really well, a tariff is basically a tax that the U.S. government slaps on goods coming in from other countries.
And right now, the spotlight is on China. I mean, come on, we all know China is the big player when it comes to making drones and all the parts that keep them flying.
Right, the majority of drones, yeah.
So this isn't some abstract economic theory, right? This is real, and it's happening now. Zach Dukowitz reported that on February 4th, 2025, a 10% tariff went into effect on all those imports from China. That's a pretty significant chunk of change that could have a ripple effect, right?
Yeah, it is. 10%, that's not insignificant. And what we have to remember is that there's always the potential for things to escalate. Russ, over at 51 Drones, he mentioned a 34% tariff in one of his examples. And Drone XL, they've also indicated that the total increase could potentially hit that 34% mark. So while we're dealing with 10% now, we got to be prepared for the possibility of those economic winds shifting even further.
Right. So we have this 10% tariff in place, but then you look at DJI and Autel, these giants. And Dukowitz pointed out that as of mid-February 2025, they hadn't raised their prices. They were just absorbing that 10%. Makes you wonder, what's their strategy? How long can they keep that up?
Right. Yeah. I mean, can they just keep eating that cost? Dukowitz makes a good point, Absorbing costs can only go so far. At the end of the day, businesses got to make a profit, and sooner or later, they're going to have to pass those increased costs down the line. He predicts, and it makes sense, that we're probably going to see price increases on drones, 10% or more, maybe even 15 to 20% if you factor in all the potential supply chain issues. And it's not just about the fancy high-end drones. Think about all the essentials, batteries, props, you name it. It all adds up.
Okay, so it's not as simple as just adding that 10% tariff onto the price tag we see on Amazon, right? Russ from 51 Drones, he had a really great example using the DJI Mini 4 Pro. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, absolutely. That example really drives home the reality of how this works. So let's say the DJI Mini 4 Pro retails for $1,000. The importer, they're probably paying around $600 for the drone itself, plus maybe $30 for shipping. Now tack on a 34% tariff onto that $600 import cost, and suddenly you're adding another $204. Right. So the importer's costs have jumped to $834. By the time that cost trickles down through wholesalers and reaches you, the consumer, that $1,000 drone could easily be closer to $1,200. That's a pretty significant difference.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And another key takeaway from Russ is that it's the importer, the one bringing the goods into the country, who pays the tariff, not the manufacturer in China. They're still selling their drones at the same price.
Yeah, that's a really important distinction. And, when we connect this back to you, the drone pilot, whether you're flying solo or running a big operation with multiple drones, it's going to affect your bottom line. Russ is right. The costs of buying new drones, keeping your fleet up and running, all those replacement parts, batteries, motors, props, gimbals, flight controllers, chargers, it's all likely to go up because of the tariffs and the fact that most of this stuff comes from China.
So it's bigger than just buying a new drone. Russ also mentioned that there might be even wider, ripple effects across the entire drone industry. It sounds like we need to be ready for more than just tighter budgets.
Exactly. Russ brought up some potential knock-on effects that are worth considering. We might see delays in new drone launches because manufacturers are grappling with higher costs and maybe even rethinking their entire supply chains.
Makes sense.
And retailers, they might get a little more cautious about stocking up on inventory. That means longer wait times for you if you need a specific drone or a particular part. Repair costs, that's another thing that could go up as replacement parts become more expensive.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then there are the smaller brands, the ones that rely heavily on those cost-effective parts from China. They might face some real struggles, even to the point of not being able to compete or stay afloat.
Yeah, it's a tough spot for them. And Dukowitz really emphasized how vulnerable those supply chains are. Because China is such a powerhouse in making both the drones and the components, any disruption is going to be felt globally, even for those drone companies that are based outside of China.
Absolutely. He brought up Skydio, an American drone manufacturer. They were hit with production slowdowns because of sanctions limiting their access to things like batteries, which they were getting from China. It really underscores how interconnected everything is.
Right. Even if you're trying to manufacture elsewhere, you still might need those parts from China.
Exactly.
Dukowitz also pointed out some interesting short-term market dynamics. He suggested that buying directly from, let's say, DJI's website might actually become more expensive because the tariffs are applied immediately. But resellers, like Amazon, who stocked up before the tariffs hit, they might be offering lower prices for a while.
Interesting, right? Those resellers with their pre-tariff stockpiles, they can offer a bit of a buffer.
All right.
But as Dukowitz pointed out, those stockpiles aren't going to last forever. He also mentioned the possibility of a bit of a buying frenzy as people rush to get drones before the prices go up, followed by a slowdown once those higher prices become the new normal. It's a potentially volatile market in the short term.
Yeah, we already saw some early signs of that happening. Drone Life reported on Paul Rossi, the CEO of 910 Drones, back in mid-February 2025. He got notices of price increases specifically on their enterprise and Agris product lines directly due to the new tariffs.
Right.
And he also mentioned that there was some confusion about pricing among those value-added resellers who weren't buying directly from DJI. It seems like there's some uncertainty about how those tariffs are getting passed along.
Yeah, definitely. It shows that the impact is being felt across the board. And that brings us to a really important question for our listeners. How can you guys strategically respond to all of this? And that's where Tony Marino's insights, especially his focus on PESTEL analysis, become really valuable.
Let's dive into PESTEL. Tony Marino really stresses how important this is for understanding and responding to big shifts like this. For those who aren't familiar, can you break down what PESTEL actually means?
Sure. PESTEL, it's an acronym, a way to analyze those external factors that can impact any business, including yours as a drone pilot. Each letter stands for a different area: political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal. By looking at each of these areas, you get a much clearer picture of what's going on, especially with these new tariffs.
Okay, so let's take them one by one. First up, P for political. How do tariffs fit into that political landscape?
Well, tariffs are a direct result of political decisions, government policies, and trade restrictions, just like Tony Marino said. We're talking about decisions made at the highest level that have a very real impact on businesses that deal with international trade. And it's not a new thing. Marino's article reminds us that we've seen tariffs on Chinese goods before.
Right, and the White House briefing on the current tariffs, which were implemented in February 2025, they're calling it a reciprocal tariff policy. They say it's to address trade imbalances and what they see as unfair trade practices. They even declared a national emergency based on these trade deficits and a lack of reciprocity from other countries.
Yeah, they basically argue that these tariffs are needed to level the playing field, to correct trade practices that they believe have put the U.S. at a disadvantage. They talk about things like different tariff rates in other countries, non-tariff barriers, and economic policies that they say are hurting American workers and consumers. So these drone tariffs are part of a much bigger picture, a political and economic strategy aimed at changing the dynamics of global trade.
Okay, that makes sense. So next up is E for economic. What kind of economic impact are these tariffs going to have on drone pilots and their businesses?
Well, economically, the most immediate impact, as Marino pointed out, is the rising cost of goods. In our case, it's drones and all the parts that go with them. And this initial cost increase can have a ripple effect on everything: how many people want to buy drones, how competitive the drone services industry is, and so on. If the cost of starting and running a drone business goes up significantly, it could change who can afford to be in the market and how much they can charge for their services.
Right. And Marino's article, Drone Pilots in Peril, really highlights the pressure this puts on profit margins. If your equipment costs more, but you can't charge your clients that much more, your profits are going to shrink. So drone pilots need to seriously rethink their business models and strategies.
Absolutely. They have to be aware of these economic pressures. We're talking about things like inflation, fluctuations in exchange rates if they're buying stuff internationally, and the overall health of the economy. All of that's going to interact with these tariffs and ultimately shape their financial situation.
Moving on to S for social. This one seems a bit less directly connected to tariffs, but how do these broader social trends play a role?
You're right. The link is less direct, but it's still important. Marino mentions how public opinion on international trade can influence government policy. If a lot of people favor domestic industries or are concerned about trade with certain countries, it can create political pressure to implement tariffs.
Okay, I see.
And more directly related to drone pilots, if drone services become more expensive because of the tariffs, their clients might not be as willing to pay for them. If aerial surveys, photography, inspections, if all of that becomes a lot more expensive, some clients might look for other options or cut back on how much they use drones.
Yeah, affordability definitely plays a role in how widely a technology is adopted. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about T's for technological. The drone industry relies heavily on technology, so how do tariffs impact this side of things?
Well, the drone industry is all about innovation, pushing the boundaries of technology. And as Marino points out, a lot of those advancements have come from overseas. So it's particularly vulnerable to the effects of tariffs. If essential components, like high-tech sensors, cameras, or flight control systems, if those get hit with tariffs and become more expensive, it's not just going to raise the price of current drone models, it could also slow down the pace of innovation and the adoption of new technologies. Manufacturers might think twice about using those high-cost, tariffed components in their new designs.
Yeah, it could really stifle progress and limit access to those latest, greatest innovations.
Okay, how about E for environmental? This seems even more distantly related to tariffs.
It is. The direct connection isn't as clear. Marino does mention, though, that environmental regulations can indirectly influence trade policies. Like if there are environmental concerns about how drone components are made or disposed of overseas, it could theoretically lead to trade measures.
I see.
But that's not the main driver behind the current tariffs. More broadly, as the drone industry grows and faces more scrutiny regarding things like noise pollution or its visual impact, those environmental regulations could become a bigger factor down the line.
Okay, that makes sense. And finally, we have L for legal. Besides the actual tariff laws, what other legal aspects should drone pilots be aware of? Well, Marino emphasizes that trade regulations and the potential for import restrictions are important legal factors to consider. He mentioned Texas HB 41, which focuses on security concerns related to where drones are made, as an example of how legal frameworks can affect which drones are available and how they can be used.
Okay.
So, staying up to date on trade laws, intellectual property rules for drone tech, and any potential restrictions on specific technologies is going to be super important for drone pilots.
So PESTEL really gives us a good framework for analyzing these tariffs. Now, drawing on all of this, especially the practical advice in Tony Marino's Drone Pilots in Peril, what are some concrete steps that drone pilots can take?
Marino outlines several key strategies, and the first one is to diversify your supply chains. This means don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't rely solely on China for your drones and parts. Look for suppliers in other countries, maybe even domestic manufacturers, even if their prices are a little higher at first.
Right.
Build relationships with multiple suppliers across different regions so you're more resilient and have more negotiating power. And think about diversifying the drone models you use. Don't be tied to just one brand. It gives you more flexibility.
So basically, don't put all your eggs in one basket, especially if that basket is getting more expensive or facing supply issues. Good advice. What's the next strategy?
The second one is to really focus on increasing your operational efficiency. When costs are going up, you've got to squeeze every bit of efficiency out of your business. Streamline your workflows, minimize the time you spend on tasks, cut your overhead, and think about investing in energy-efficient equipment to save money in the long run.
Right. Makes sense.
Automating tasks where you can and sticking to a regular maintenance schedule to avoid expensive repairs are also key. The more efficient you are, the better you'll be able to handle those cost increases.
Efficiency is always good, but it sounds like it's absolutely crucial right now. What else does Marino recommend?
Number 3 is to adapt your pricing models. Be upfront with your clients about potential price adjustments because of the tariffs. You might want to think about offering different pricing tiers to fit different budgets and project needs. Offering discounts for longer-term contracts could be a good way to lock in some business and provide value. You could also explore dynamic pricing models that adjust to the fluctuated costs of equipment.
Okay.
And above all, focus on value-based pricing. Clearly communicate the quality, expertise, and benefits you bring to each project so you can justify your rates, even if your costs have gone up.
Being open and honest with clients seems super important. No one likes surprise price increases. What's the next piece of advice?
Number 4 is to stay informed and be flexible. The world of trade and policies is always changing, so keep an eye on the news, especially anything about tariffs and their impact on the drone industry. Be ready to adapt your sourcing and operations quickly if there are changes in supplier availability or pricing. And it's worth investing in market research to understand how your clients' needs and budgets are shifting because of these economic changes. Planning for different scenarios, like what happens if tariffs go up even more, can help you be proactive instead of reactive.
So being adaptable and staying ahead of the curve is key. And what's the last strategy Marino talks about?
The final one, and maybe the most impactful in the long run, is advocacy and engagement. Encourage other drone pilots and people in the industry to join groups like the Commercial Drone Alliance. These organizations can help you stay informed, connect with others, and advocate for policies that support the drone industry.
Right.
You can also reach out to your elected officials to share your concerns and push for fair trade policies. And working together with other drone pilots in your area to share strategies and resources can make a huge difference in tackling these challenges together.
So we've got 5 really solid strategies. Diversify your supply chains, increase your operational efficiency, adapt your pricing models, stay informed and flexible, and get involved in advocacy. It sounds like taking action is the best way to handle this uncertainty.
Definitely. These tariffs are challenging, but if you understand the bigger picture using PESTEL and you put these strategies into action, you can not just survive this, you can set yourself up for success in the long run.
So it's not all doom and gloom. Russ from 51 Drones, he actually had a pretty optimistic, maybe even a bold prediction that it could be a glimmer of hope for some.
Yeah, he did. It's speculative, of course, but he suggested that these tariffs might actually boost the U.S. drone industry. He even mentioned the possibility of companies like Skydio getting back into the recreational and prosumer market.
Interesting.
The idea is that if those imported drones get more expensive, people might start looking for alternatives made in the U.S. It's a long-term possibility, something to keep an eye on.
For sure. But the main takeaway is, even though there's uncertainty, just sitting around and waiting for things to change isn't going to cut it. Staying informed, adapting your business, and focusing on efficiency and the value you offer, those are going to be the keys to navigating this successfully.
Absolutely. And so our final thought for you, the listener, is this. What innovative solutions are you going to explore, not just to survive these changes, but to actually thrive and build a successful path for yourself in this evolving drone industry?
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for joining us, and keep on droning.